Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump signing into law a bipartisan bill that toughens punishment for fentanyl traffickers. The heartbreaking stories told by victims' families and the role played by China in allowing fentanyl into the U.S. Iris Tao at the White House. A Syria news broadcast captures the moment an Israeli airstrike hit Damascus. Meanwhile, hundreds of Israeli Druze gather at the Syrian border as the conflict with Syria continues. Jason Perry has the latest. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the escalation in fighting between Israel and Syria will be resolved by tonight. Jack Bradley is at the State Department. Russia sends 400 drones at targets in Ukraine, including the hometown of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, causing death, fires, and more. U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg continues his Ukraine trip amid the attacks. Arian Pazdar reports. And President Trump's rescissions package clears a key procedural hurdle in the Senate ahead of a Friday deadline, but it's not yet at the finish line. The Republican senators maintain their opposition to Trump's request to cut about $9 billion for foreign aid and public broadcasting. Luis Eduardo Martinez has the story.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Vice President J.D. Vance was the time-breaking vote in a procedural hurdle to advance President Trump's rescissions package through the Senate. The rescissions package is a request from the president to rescind funds that were previously approved by Congress. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has more on the story.
A lot of these recommendations now are an implementation of what DOJ found in areas of the budget that they thought we could achieve savings, but not undermine the critical mission aspects of a lot of these, some of these programs do.
President Trump has requested Congress rescind some $9.4 billion in funds appropriated last December for USAID, NPR, and PBS. The clawback would not disrupt the core mission nor rescind total funding from the agencies it's targeting, but Democrats have promised to oppose them.
You know, DOJ comes along with its chainsaw approaches. They just cut. They have no idea what the consequences will be, and they don't give a hoot. Gutting bipartisan investments, compromising our national security, hurting America's standard throughout the world is not popular.
Republican Senators Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitch McConnell oppose the rescissions package, primarily on principle.
We're lawmakers. We should be legislating. What we're getting now is a direction from the White House and being told, this is the priority. We want you to execute on it. We'll be back with you with another round. I don't accept that. I'm going to be voting no.
The House of Representatives approved the $9.4 billion rescissions package last month, but the Senate has amended the bill to remove some $400 million worth of spending cuts to the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief Program, otherwise known as PEPFAR.
There was a lot of interest among our members in doing something on the PEPFAR issue, and so that's reflected in the substitute. And we hope that if we can get this across the finish line in the Senate, that the House would accept that one small modification.
If these three Republican senators maintain their opposition, it is likely that Vice President J.D. Vance would have to become once again the tiebreaker to advance a final vote. If the Senate version of the rescissions package is passed, it would have to go back to the House of Representatives, and lawmakers have a July 18th deadline to pass the rescissions package. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
As the Senate is deciding whether to cut funding for public broadcasting, are everyday Americans on board with a proposal? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
Do you ever get your news from NPR or PBS?
I have in the past. I used to watch PBS when I was a kid. NPR, I don't have much use for it.
Yes, I do. And I do donate every year, and I'm a mega Ken Burns fan.
Not so much anymore because where I live, the antenna doesn't pick up the Channel 8, but I used to watch it all the time.
My wife listens to NPR all the time. I find it highly biased.
As President Trump has been alleging that there's a lot of biases going on in these two outlets. Have you noticed any of that?
No, I think it's very balanced.
If I really want to look, I can say, oh, well, but I mean, I don't think so.
Oh, everybody's biased.
If you don't watch NPR, how do you know they're being biased? Go and watch, just watch it from start to finish and make it your own decision. decision. If you still don't like it.
I'm zoning out like I'm listening to NPR right now.
It's very neutral to me.
Okay.
And as much as I hate to say it, sometimes borderline dry because it is so neutral.
I think every news agency has biases, but I think the biggest issue is just the woke propaganda being put into pretty much every media, though.
I watched a few episodes recently of Sesame Street, which is on public broadcasting, and I will say that I'm kind of appalled. They're pushing LGBTQ plus agenda to kids who really don't know the difference.
And what are your thoughts on President Trump's decision to pull funding away from NPR and PBS? NPR is going to lose about probably 1% of their funding, and PBS will lose about 15%. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a real shame. I think that would be a huge mistake if that were to happen.
Taking money away from things that we all want, that people need, and giving it to rich people. It ain't right.
I don't agree that we should be paying for any of it, to be honest with you. I think media should be paying for their own programming.
I think if you want to continue to support access to quality education, I think it's a tax dollar I'm willing to spend.
I think the government needs to stay out of media. They got to, or we're going to be like China. We're going to be like North Korea.
We should stop allowing foreign entities own our media in this country to prevent this type of manipulation in our media.
If you're going to have something funded by the government, it needs to be balanced, and that's the only thing it can be, and they're not.
President Trump signing into law today a bipartisan legislation aiming to toughen prison sentences of fentanyl traffickers. The president highlighting stories of fentanyl victims and calling out China for helping to smuggle drugs into the U.S. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
At a moving ceremony featuring families holding pictures of loved ones they had lost to drugs, President Trump signing into law a bipartisan legislation that would classify all fentanyl-related substances, including its copycat versions, as Schedule I drugs, which carry the harshest penalties.
It's a big deal, as they will tell you, meaning anyone caught trafficking these illicit poisons will be punished with a mandatory 10-year minimum sentence in prison.
Fentanyl, which is 50 times stronger than heroin, has become the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. Trump invites to the podium parents who lost their children to the drug to share their stories.
We did everything right, but one pill, one mistake given by a friend under peer pressure took his life. For 4 years, we felt ignored. But you've changed that.
To say thank you, Mr. President, for stopping the border crossings. Full stop, mic drop.
President Trump also called out China's role in facilitating the smuggling of fentanyl into the U.S. And China remains the largest source for fentanyl precursors, which are then used to make fentanyl in Mexico before they end up in the U.S. Trump stressing his tariffs as a punishment.
China delivers much of the fentanyl. Some people would say all of it. They deliver it into Mexico and even into our own country. We have a 20%, so they pay billions of dollars in damages for what they've done.
While President Trump says he believes China will tighten control, the communist regime has a track record of making promises without taking solid actions, especially when it comes to fentanyl. A congressional report last year accused China of directly subsidizing the manufacturing and the export of illicit fentanyl materials. And that's before the president, upon taking office earlier this year, accused China of actively expanding the business of poisoning our citizens. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
In the Middle East, the growing conflict between Israel and Syria is causing international concern. This comes as Israeli forces have now struck Syria's military headquarters in Damascus. NTD's Jason Perry has the update.
An anchor in Syria was reporting the news on Wednesday when an Israeli airstrike hit Syria's Ministry of Defense building in Damascus. Emergency crews responded to the scene and they were seen escorting the injured. Israel also released footage of the strike and said that the military headquarters in Damascus is the location from which, quote, Syrian regime commanders direct combat operations and deploy regime forces to the al-Suwaida area. Suwaida is in southern Syria and is home to members of the Druze community, a minority group in Syria that's an offshoot of Shiite Islam. And the Druze have been battling Syria's security forces, who are mostly Sunni Islam. Israel says they have a deep alliance with the Druze and have vowed to protect the minority group from Syria's government forces. Also on Wednesday, Israel reported striking, quote, in the area of the Syrian regime's presidential palace and several armored vehicles that were headed to the Druze area of Sweda, as well as additional strikes on tanks and pickup trucks loaded with heavy machine guns, which were also on their way to the Druze area. Syria's foreign ministry released a statement on X saying they condemned Israel's strikes in Damascus as well as in Sweda. Israel's foreign minister urged Syria to, quote, come to its senses.
If the regime in Damascus does not come to its senses, it will ultimately move away from all the main goals it has set for itself, primarily governance and economic prosperity. Therefore, it would be good for it to come to its senses and to restore order.
Members of the Druze community live in Israel as well. On Wednesday, hundreds of Israeli Druze went to the Syrian border, and some even crossed into Syria.
We feel very weak because we see our brothers, families, our home, and people being killed there for no reason, only because they are Druze.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said people who cross the border are interfering with Israel's military operations in Syria.
We are acting to save our Druze brothers and to eliminate the regime's gangs. And now I have one request from you. You are citizens of Israel. Do not cross the border. You are endangering your lives. You could be killed. You could be kidnapped.
Approximately 120,000 Druze live in Israel, while about 700,000 live in Syria. Jason Perry, NTD News.
With Israel striking Syria's capital today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the fighting will soon be over. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the latest on the peace efforts from the State Department.
These are historic, long-time rivalries between different groups in the southwest of Syria, Bedouins, the Druze community, and it led to an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, it looks like, between the Israeli side and the Syrian side.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying the fighting in Syria will soon be over. That's after Israel struck Syria's capital of Damascus in order to protect the Druze ethnic and religious minority community who's fighting with the Syrian government. Secretary Rubio posted on X, quote, "We have engaged all the parties involved in the clashes in Syria. We have agreed on specific steps that will bring this troubling and horrifying situation to an end tonight. This will require all parties to deliver on the commitments they have made, and this is what we fully expect them to do." From the Oval Office, Rubio said,
"And we think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country."
In May, President Trump met with the Syrian leader in Qatar and lifted sanctions on Syria to help them thrive economically. That was during President Trump's Middle East visit, in which he secured hundreds of billions of dollars in investment commitments from several allied countries. Meanwhile, Rubio and the foreign minister of Bahrain signed an agreement that would allow the U.S. and American companies to invest in nuclear energy projects in Bahrain, all for civilian purposes. This is similar to an agreement that Rubio signed in Malaysia while he was there last week.
That the United States is prepared to be a partner with any nation on earth that wants to pursue a civil nuclear program.
This MOU reinforces our two countries' determination to prevent the proliferation of nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction.
The U.S. is also further expanding its trade with Bahrain as the Crown Prince of Bahrain met with President Trump at the White House, committing to invest $17 billion in the U.S.
And this is real. This is
it's real money.
These aren't fake deals. These are real deals.
They don't have to borrow the money.
We don't have to borrow it. It's coming in.
This is all part of the Trump administration's efforts to secure funding hundreds of billions of dollars in investments into the U.S. from the Middle East. And in doing so, forming better partnerships with those countries so they don't partner with our adversaries like the Chinese Communist Party. Reporting from the State Department, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Russia keeps targeting Ukrainian cities, including the hometown of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg continues his Ukraine trip amid the attacks. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pozdar has the war update.
Russia early Wednesday sending hundreds of drones toward Ukraine. 4 key regions are now dealing with the aftermath, including at least 3 civilian casualties and dozens of injuries. Ukrainian officials say Zelenskyy's hometown, Kryvyi Rih, as well as Kharkiv and Vinnytsia, suffered the heaviest bombardment. According to the Air Force, Russia fired around 400 drones at Ukraine, most of which were intercepted. The foreign minister of neighboring Poland says a Polish factory near the border was hit, writing, "There are injuries, including 2 people severely burned. Putin's criminal war is getting closer to our borders." Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg continues his Ukraine trip amid the attacks. Kellogg and Zelenskyy discussed alleged human rights violations by Russia on Wednesday, including the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children and the detention of civilians in occupied territories and in Russia. On Monday, President Trump announced that the U.S. will send Patriot missile systems through NATO to European allies. They can then send those to Ukraine. Trump stressed that European countries will pay for those weapons for Ukraine, not the U.S. On Wednesday, the State Department was asked which countries have already agreed to that plan.
I will not discuss whatever we may or may not have negotiated or diplomatic discussions.
A day earlier, on Tuesday, Denmark, the Netherlands and others said they support Trump's plan. And Ukraine's foreign minister says Kiev is ready for more peace talks with Russia and that Ukraine wants the U.S. to be part of the talks.
It would be good if other leaders, primarily President Trump, our European colleagues, and Turkish President Erdogan, participated in this meeting.
He added that Ukraine has been ready for talks for months now, but he didn't mention a desired date for the next negotiations. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Coming up on Capitol Hill, lawmakers debate the role that non-government organizations played in what Republicans call a historic border crisis created by the Biden administration. Jason Blair has the highlights from the hearing, which grew heated at times. And 3 Louisiana police chiefs and 2 others are accused of taking hundreds of bribes. Federal officials say they faked police reports to help foreign nationals stay in the U.S. Christina Corona has more on that when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. There was debate in Washington, D.C. on how non-governmental organizations shape the border and immigration situation. And U.S. Customs and Border Protection says illegal border crossings hit new record lows during the month of June. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
On Capitol Hill, House reps debate the effect of non-government organizations on the border crisis during the previous administration. Chairman Michael Guest names 3 NGOs who receive 85 to 99% of their money from the federal government.
These 3 groups saw their combined revenue grow to an astonishing $2 billion+ by 2022. I would argue that these groups had a vested interest in prolonging the crisis.
Ranking member Benny Johnson says that claims against the NGOs are, quote, scare tactics.
Republicans' so-called investigation and today's hearing are shameful abuses of congressional power to bully people for how they choose to exercise their religion and help their fellow man.
Witnesses were invited to testify. One witness said that during previous leadership, there were low vetting requirements to adopt an unaccompanied child who crossed the border illegally.
When I spoke with a retired Border Patrol agent, he had said that the requirements to adopt a dog that was about to be euthanized were higher than the standards and the documents that needed to be provided for an adult to sponsor a child.
The amount of illegal border crossings have hit record lows, according to new data by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. 25,228 total illegal border encounters were recorded for June. The CBP says that this is the lowest monthly total ever. June 28th had the lowest amount of crossings ever recorded in a single day, with 138. And CBP data says that apprehensions also hit a record low with just over 8,000 in June. CBP Commissioner Rodney Scott says in a statement, from shutting down illegal crossings to seizing fentanyl and enforcing billions in tariffs, CBP is delivering results on every front. Under this administration, we are protecting this country with relentless focus, and the numbers prove it. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Federal authorities have charged 3 current and former Louisiana police chiefs with taking bribes in exchange for filing false police reports. The reports allegedly made it appear that non-citizens were eligible for special visas meant for crime victims. NTD's Christina Corona has the details.
Federal authorities have charged 5 people in Louisiana, including 3 police chiefs, a U.S. Marshal, and a businessman, in an alleged scheme to obtain fraudulent U visas.
The indictment alleges that Patel, Doyle, Slaney, Dixon, and Onisha, and others produced and authenticated false police reports in several central Louisiana parishes.
Oakdale Police Chief Chad Doyle, Forest Hill Police Chief Glenn Dixon, Marshal Michael Slaney with the Ward 5 Marshal's Office in Oakdale, former Glenmora Police Chief Tipa Onisha, and Oakdale businessman Chandrakant Patel are those charged. They're accused of creating false police reports to make it appear that immigrants were victims of violent crimes, allowing them to apply for U visas.
A non-immigrant U visa is a visa that was authorized by Congress to allow foreign nationals without any official status in the United States to remain in the country under certain circumstances when they're victims of a crime or witnesses to crime.
Acting U.S. Attorney Alexander Van Hook says these visas are designed to allow non-citizens to help law enforcement and prosecutors prosecute crimes. Obtaining a U visa can provide certain crime victims and their families a path to becoming U.S. citizens. Van Hook said there was a suspicious surge in reports of armed robberies involving people who weren't from Louisiana. Prosecutors say the robberies never happened. Authorities say the officers were paid thousands of dollars for each name in the report.
Police officers were paid $5,000 per name. That's what we allege in the indictment. And that there were hundreds of names.
The 5 defendants face charges including visa fraud, conspiracy, bribery, mail fraud, and money laundering. Christina Corona, NTD News.
A California couple is accused of running a surrogacy scheme. Surrogate moms found out that the babies they helped carry are now in foster care. Federal and local investigations are underway. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Federal and local investigations are being conducted as many surrogate moms from Texas to Florida found out that the babies they carried are now in foster care. The mothers thought they were helping a Chinese couple in Southern California who were struggling to have a second child. It turns out the women were all surrogates for the same couple at the same time, matched through the agency Mark Surrogacy, now renamed Future Spring Surrogacy. The suspected couple is Sylvia Zhang, 38, and Guojun Xuan, 65, who served as president of the Xinjiang Chamber of Commerce in the United States. That organization is part of a network tied to the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department. In early May, police investigated a child abuse situation in the couple's home after a 2-month-old baby was hospitalized with head trauma. A nanny was allegedly caught on camera violently shaking the baby, and the parents reportedly delayed seeking medical care for 2 days. Police say that Zhang and Swan were arrested on suspicion of felony child endangerment and neglect on May 9th. They were later released. The Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services also investigated and removed all children from the couple's custody, 21 children in total, ranging from 2 months to 13 years old, mostly babies and toddlers. One of the first surrogates to speak publicly was Kayla Elliott, who shared her story on social media and launched a GoFundMe to raise legal funds. She is now trying to gain custody of the baby girl she delivered. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic nominee for New York City mayor, met with Democratic lawmakers in Washington, D.C. today. Will he win the backing of Democratic leaders? Tune into Capitol Report with Steve Lance to hear from both a Democratic and a Republican strategist. That's at 7 p.m. tonight. Coming up, President Trump campaigned on ending the war in Ukraine, but why has that been more challenging than expected? And is the president taking a new approach to the conflict with his latest strategies? Foreign policy and national security analyst Armin Kurdian joins us to discuss. And British politicians raise concerns over China ramping up repression of the spiritual discipline Falun Gong within the UK, going so far as to make fake bomb threats and physically attacking practitioners. Malcolm Hudson brings us a report from London after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump on Monday laid out his latest strategy for bringing an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, including funneling new weapons to Kyiv and threatening economic punishment on Moscow if peace isn't reached in 50 days. The president has previously said that ending the conflict would be more difficult than previously anticipated. Joining us now to discuss is foreign policy and national security analyst Armen Kurdian. He's also a retired U.S. Navy captain. Armen, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, to begin, why do you think it's been a lot harder to broker a peace deal than Trump originally thought?
2 words, Vladimir Putin. Good afternoon, Tiffany. Putin is taking every type of opportunity he can to obfuscate, inveigle, and basically blur the discussion in order for him to continue this war in any way he possibly can. This is typical classic Putin. Trump was right to try to open up the hand of peace and make a good faith effort in the eyes of the world to try to make peace. And I think that is necessary in order to do that, pausing the weapons and everything to try to get to that point. Putin obviously sees any kind of weakness, whether perceived, real, or not, to try to continue this war. You see what he's doing in raining havoc down upon Kyiv. So Trump is right to start acting, but frankly, I think it's time for him to act a lot faster. I don't think this 50-day wait is good. I know he says, well, it could be a little bit less. Who knows, a few weeks. I think it really kind of needs to be today.
Now, on the weapons side, President Trump did announce the U.S. would resume weapon shipments to Ukraine, but this time European NATO allies would pay for them before sending them on to Ukraine. What do you make of this pivot?
I think it's good and it's important. It gives the Europeans a little bit more skin in the game on what's actually happening. They can collectively help pay for these weapons that the United States is producing and sending over there. But I'm hopeful that it's going to be more than just weapons, because they need more than just that. They need fuel for their systems. They need construction equipment to rebuild busted infrastructure, perhaps meals ready to eat for the soldiers and the troops, or uniforms, or other types of support equipment. Anything that Ukraine needs for the war effort. It really needs to be an all hands on deck. And the U.S. hasn't moved itself into a wartime economy. We've been shipping over things and writing new contracts to basically replenish our own stocks, kind of piecemeal. It needs to be a lot more coordinated. I think in the recent DOD reconciliation bill, the NDAA, I think they're going to do a little bit more in order to kind of bring it all together. But it's not anywhere near enough. Russia is putting 40% of its economy into this war, and they're basically holding serve right now. If the U.S. and the West were to actually go forth and put the same level of effort, Russia would be on its heels, and they would want to come back to the table within days.
And zooming out a bit here, Armen, what do you make of Trump's latest approach to the Russia-Ukraine war? Does it free up the U.S. to focus elsewhere, like the Indo-Pacific and China, as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has said in the past?
Both of these areas of responsibility are very, very important. This, frankly, is not an AO war that we should have really been even worrying about, considering the previous administration's failure to stop this war from happening. But something to consider right now, you talk about the PACOM AOR. Look at how many nations are actually involved in this conflict. Pretty much all the NATO countries, the United States, you've got Canada, and then on the other side, you've got Russia, you've got China, North Korea, and Iran all supporting. You almost have a de facto world war that is happening right now. There just happen to be 2 countries that are actually shooting at each other, but the rest of the planet is heavily involved in fighting this. And the poor people of the Ukraine are the ones who are actually suffering. Clausewitz has always said, as part of his war studies, that in order to be victorious, you have to bring maximum pressure to bear on your enemy once the shooting actually starts. And that really wasn't done in the early stages of the war. Donald Trump has inherited a terrible mess that it should never have occurred. But if he wants to bring it to a conclusion, it's not going to be done starting the discussions with diplomacy. It's just we're past that point now. I'm glad he made the effort. I think it was the right thing to do. Right now, the other right thing to do is to bring full military, geopolitical, and economic pressure on Russia, including perhaps seizing those $300 billion of frozen Russian assets and using those to help fund this side of the war.
And when it comes to players involved in this war, China's foreign minister reportedly told the EU foreign policy chief that Beijing could not accept Russia's defeat in the war, as it would free up Washington to focus on China. Given Beijing's interest in a prolonged war here, how has China been helping Russia?
Incredibly telling, isn't it? They want Russia to continue to fight Ukraine so that the U.S. sends a weapon such as Patriot batteries and these complex missiles and ATACMS on the Army side that, frankly, take the United States a long time to build and manufacture. Our industrial base can only build so many of these at one time. You can't just go to Raytheon or Lockheed Martin and say, build me 1,000 more of these missiles next year. So I can't really do that. I got to hire more people. I got to build more facilities. I got to get more certifications. I got to do more training. I got to secure more materials. I got to secure more vendors at the fourth and fifth level of manufacture. It is a very complex and interesting issue. China is very vested in that because China knows that if they want to go into a Taiwan scenario, the way that they can do that is not necessarily to put all their forces in place and then attack. They would probably launch a barrage of missiles and drones against U.S., Japanese, and Korean forces in the Indo-PACOM area to try to keep our heads down. And then they'd be able to move in because it would take us a long time to reconstitute that. So that surprise attack, what China wants to do, they do have ulterior motives at play here, which is another reason why the U.S. needs to take this conflict much more seriously. I know we've been taking it very seriously, but even more seriously, and bring it to a conclusion swiftly.
It does seem like Trump's latest strategy takes China's role into account with the secondary tariffs on countries that help Russia, like China, India, buying up Russian oil. How big of a blow is this going to be to China?
Initially, it's a question of China probably would look at this like, well, we need oil, and we're going to get it from Iran and Russia if the rest of the world is not getting it from us. So they're going to keep doing that, and they'll find a way to pay for it. It may not be in petrodollars, but it may be in barter, some other kind of exchange of services or materials that's going to happen. You see these countries that are now working together very, very closely. In some ways, this war with Ukraine has become very, very profitable for these four countries. I mean, look at North Korea. 10,000 troops with another 20,000 on the way, 30,000 troops being paid by Russia in order to support their war effort. That money's going back to North Korea. China's been buying $4 billion of Iranian oil on a monthly basis. Russia is getting Iranian drones and missiles. They're getting piece parts, technology, and other things from China, even though they say they're not actually doing it. It is economically beneficial for those four countries to continue to work into this war. So it is a very complex. It's getting more complex, and it should never have gotten this complex. Once the war started, if Joe Biden had gone full throttle and given Ukraine the F-16s, other types of high-tech weapons, artillery that they needed in the early stages of that war, like some of the Western European nations were offering, like Poland was offering, we probably wouldn't be in this situation. Unfortunately, we are learning the hard way what needs to be done. So the suffering is going to continue, and it's not going to necessarily be solved by more Patriot batteries per se or more super high-tech weapons. Those are necessary, but they're not going to win the war. More artillery is going to win the war. More fuel, more construction equipment, more light vehicles, more ability for Ukraine to move around and maneuver, more drones to attack Russian forces with, which they have been doing with very great success. So hopefully the president and his national security staff will see this and start moving much more quickly.
Armin Kurdian, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Now we turn to Britain, where members of parliament are raising concerns about China's repression on UK soil. A seminar held in parliament yesterday focused on the CCP targeting the spiritual discipline Falun Gong in Britain, going as far as to make fake bomb threats and physically attacking a woman. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us from London.
British politicians, a leading human rights lawyer and victims discussed in a parliamentary seminar the Chinese Communist Party's accelerating transnational repression. That's the Chinese regime's growing campaign to persecute people beyond its own borders, including in Western nations such as Britain, and includes actions ranging from threats of violence, bomb scares, and even to physical attacks on individuals. Outside Parliament, Falun Gong practitioners meditate and peacefully raise awareness about the CCP's persecution against them.
Since 1999, they have been tortured and killed in China just for their faith and choice to live by the values of truth, compassion and forbearance. British lawmaker Lord David Alton said practitioners have been targeted outside China too.
Examples in the seminar today included a lady who was physically assaulted outside the British Museum. It was a heart-rending story. She's still living with the consequences of that assault. This is intolerable in the United Kingdom.
The lady was left with fractured vertebrae and significant damage to her spinal nerves. International human rights lawyer David Matus said the CCP has intensified the repression abroad since 2022. According to information leaked in June 2024 from China's Ministry of Public Security, the regime's stated goal is to, quote, fully eliminate Falun Gong worldwide.
The governments have to be aware of the problem, and I would say there's not a great awareness right now of the problem.
The seminar heard the CCP is also targeting the world-renowned classical Chinese dance group Shen Yun, which was founded by Falun Gong practitioners as a way to revive traditional Chinese culture and show the real China before communism. In February this year, 3 British theatres received fake bomb threats seeking to cancel the shows, though police found no real threat and the shows continued as scheduled. British Member of Parliament Mary Rimmer watched Shen Yun perform in London.
So it's here in London, and people should go and see it, but the threats just want to stop them operating. They don't want the story to be known.
And the former leader of the UK's Conservative Party and British Member of Parliament Ian Duncan Smith said the reality is that the CCP does not care what country its targets are in.
As far as they're concerned, they have their right to go after any person that they think is essentially and should be back in China being persecuted. And so they'll follow that persecution here in the United Kingdom.
He said the government must crack down on any transnational repression on UK soil and expel the individuals responsible for it. The Joint Committee on Human Rights is due to release a report on transnational repression in the UK. British lawmaker Lord Alton said this will be an opportunity for the government to say what positive actions it will take. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
More than 1,000 people will gather in the nation's capital to call for an end to a deadly persecution of faith targeting millions. 2025 marks the 26th year of the Chinese Communist Party's persecution of Falun Gong, a spiritual discipline based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Alongside human rights champions and many others, Falun Gong practitioners will hold a rally and parade calling for an end to the Chinese regime's campaign against freedom of belief. NTD's Carrie Dunst and Fiona G will bring you the events live starting at 12 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, only on NTD. Coming up in baseball, the first ever home run derby to determine a game. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. And now for your sports news, joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on right now, but let's start in baseball with last night's All-Star game, which ended in a swing-off. What is a swing-off?
Good question, Tiff. A swing-off, essentially, of course, it's just a home run derby. Now, this is the first time in baseball history, though, it actually has been used to decide a game. Of course, the All-Star game is just an exhibition, does not actually count in the standings. But this swing-off, I would say, it kind of became necessary if you go back all the way back to the All-Star game in 2002 when it ended in a tie. Of course, in baseball, if you're tied after 9 innings, you just play extra innings until somebody wins. But because the managers there were trying to make sure everybody got in, they were both out of pitchers by the time the 9th inning was done. They were tied there. So they ended up having to just call it a tie. Most of the fans were not very happy. I remember Commissioner Bud Selig was just like, he had his arms up in the air like they weren't quite sure what to do. So a couple of years ago, they finally came up with the home run derby idea to end the game if it was a tie, much like a shootout in hockey or soccer, though. So it was just 3 players getting 3 swings, and it ended up Kyle Schwarber won it for the National League with those 3 home runs there. So he ended up winning All-Star Game MVP honors, despite not actually getting a hit in the game. First time that's ever happened. maybe they should have the swing off, added to these regular season games. I tell you, it was definitely a hit last night. They're definitely onto something with this.
Now, this was also the first All-Star game where a challenge system was implemented for balls and strikes. Why was that used here and not for the regular season games?
I think it's because they're still testing it out, trying to get everyone used to it first before they implement it full time next season. Now, they were testing this out also in spring training as well. It seems pretty simple to use. Just the pitcher, batter, or catcher can challenge a ball or strike. Call, and they seem to go pretty quick, just a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds for each one to get the calls right. Now, as well for the highlights last night, I thought one of the major ones, at least for the TV viewers, was when Clayton Kershaw came to the mound, mic'd up, talking to the TV announcers. He was actually discussing them, what pitch to throw. It was after that one pitch they threw right down the middle, and he said, "Thank goodness that guy didn't swing. That pitch was right there, right down the middle for them." It was kind of a funny moment there. There was a kind of a different side to the game you saw there. Now, meanwhile, you never would have thought this game would actually go to the swing off, really. I mean, the National League led 6-0 there in the 7th inning where the AL started their comeback, and it wasn't really until the 9th inning with 2 outs there in the 9th that the AL actually tied the game up. So it was quite a game there. So yeah, Tiff, I've already decided I'm starting a petition to get the Home Run Derby as part of the regular season game next year. I'm counting on your signature to start this up, all right? Only diehard baseball fans, right?
All right, well, looking at golf news, the Open Championship starts in just a few hours over in Northern Ireland. Now, American Xander Schauffele won last year, so what are the odds of him repeating?
Yeah, historically not too great. No one has repeated since 2008. That was Patrick Harrington. Now, as with most majors, except of course for the Masters, they rotate the courses every year. Now, last year, Schauffele won at Royal Troon. This one is at Royal Turbush. Now, that's another links course, which means it's near the Atlantic. This, of course, are pictures of it. So there's hardly any trees, lots of tall grass, strong winds come into play, hectic weather comes into play. Let's actually hear what Schauffele said about that earlier this week.
Yeah, I drove up to Abandoned Dunes from San Diego. Took about 16 hours. I was 13 years old. Had my dad drove me and my buddy and his friend. We played 3 or 4 days in a row. I think it was just Pacific Dunes and Abandoned Dunes at the time, and we got the real weather. My rain gear stopped working, so it was that much wind and rain, and I had a blast. I had, as much as it was nice to look forward to a hot shower at the end of the day, I had so much fun for some reason trying to figure out how to play golf in that weather. Even to this day, you look at guys who grow up in Canada or overseas in Europe, it'll be windy and cold, and I always saw guys would shoot 6 or 7 under, and I'm like, how are these people doing this? You know what I mean? So it was always a battle for me, knowing that if I want to be a well-rounded player, I need to learn how to do it. So maybe I went into it with that mentality, but I always thought it was a lot of fun.
Well, there's someone who definitely plays for the love of the game, that's for sure. Now, this tournament actually starts off at about 1:35 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning. Schauffele's tee time is at 5 a.m. So set your clocks there, too.
All right, well, definitely a beautiful location over there. Shifting gears to women's basketball, though, WNBA star Caitlin Clark left last night's game with an apparent injury. What is her status?
Yeah, she has just been downgraded to out for tonight's game, a groin injury. Now, last night, Clark was grabbing her right groin when she left the game. This is like 40 seconds left in the game where they won by 8 points. But Clark, of course, she just came back from that left groin strain, just left last week. She was out for like 2 weeks with that. Before that, she was out with a left quad strain. She's already missed 9 games this season. That's nearly half the season. And if you remember, last year as a rookie, she did not miss any games. Her 4 years of college, she did not miss a single game. So this is somewhat uncharacteristic of her. In any case, her Indiana Fever play at the New York Liberty tonight without her in Brooklyn. In addition to this, her status for this weekend's All-Star festivities in Indianapolis, her home state right now, has got to be up in the air. So tough news right now for Caitlin Clark.
And for TV ratings.
And for TV ratings, your specialty, Tiff.
All right, well, Davis Thomas, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For on-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.